It was a warm evening, and the house was alive with the sounds of chatter and laughter. The occasion? A family reunion. People had traveled from all over to catch up with relatives they hadn't seen in ages. The living room was packed, filled with the smell of home-cooked food, the clinking of glasses, and the soft hum of conversation. The air was light and cheerful, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. In one corner of the room, a large, beautiful piano sat almost like a centerpiece. It was an elegant instrument, the kind that would stand out in any room. Its polished wood shone under the soft light from the overhead chandelier. But oddly enough, no one had touched it in hours. For some reason, despite the festivities, the piano had been left untouched. Everyone was busy enjoying the party, eating, talking, and playing games. But there was something about that piano that caught the eye of one person in particular. He was sitting across the room, laughing with some of the younger cousins, but his attention kept drifting back to the piano. His name wasn't important, but what mattered was his sense of humor. He was known for being the life of the party, always cracking jokes and making everyone laugh. His humor was lighthearted, and he liked to keep things fun. He didn't take life too seriously, and it was that laid-back attitude that made him so popular at family gatherings. It wasn't long before a mischievous idea sparked in his mind. He leaned over to a cousin who was sitting next to him. "What do you think?" he asked, a playful grin spreading across his face. "Bet you $5 she can't play something on that piano." The cousin, looking at the piano and then back at him, raised an eyebrow. "You're joking, right?" "She's not a pianist," the man chuckled. "Of course not. That's the point. No one here can actually play. It's all just a big fancy decoration." His cousin, unsure of what he was getting at, shrugged. "All right, but what if you lose?" "Then I'll just have to pay up." "No big deal, but trust me, she won't be able to play. I know it." The cousin hesitated for a moment, but then gave in. "Fine, I'm in." With that, the plan was set. The man, filled with excitement, turned his gaze toward the other side of the room where she was sitting, quietly chatting with a few relatives. She was a bit of an enigma to most of the family, always polite and sweet, but not exactly one to draw attention to herself. She didn't like to stand out, didn't seek the spotlight. But what most people didn't know about her was that she had a gift, one that she had kept to herself for years. She had been playing the piano since she was a little girl, spending hours alone in her room practicing difficult pieces. Her fingers moved with such grace as though they were in perfect harmony with the keys, but it wasn't something she talked about, and it wasn't something she ever did in public. To her, the piano was more than just an instrument. It was a part of her. It was her escape, her safe place. She could lose herself in the music and forget about everything else around her. But she never shared that side of herself with anyone. The piano was her secret. The man, unaware of this hidden talent, casually leaned over to her as she was talking. "Hey, you should play something on the piano." "Just for fun. I'm sure you can come up with something." She looked up at him, a little surprised by the request. "I don't know," she started to say, her voice trailing off. She was hesitant, unsure of what he was really asking. "Oh, come on," he teased, leaning in closer with a grin. "I bet you $5 you can't play anything on that thing." She frowned at the challenge. "What do you mean I can't play?" "I mean," he said, pretending to be serious, "that piano's just for decoration, right? You're not one of those piano people, are you?" She blinked at him, surprised by the way he was jokingly dismissing her. The piano was clearly more than just a decoration to her. But she wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially one so lighthearted. "Well, I can play," she said with a small smile, "but I'm not sure it's something I'd do right now." The man chuckled, giving her a wink. "No pressure. Just for fun." Without realizing it, he had just set the stage for something no one in the room would ever forget. As he walked away, still grinning at her, she felt a little uneasy. She had never performed in front of people before. The thought of playing in front of a crowd, even a small one, made her stomach twist in knots. But then again, this wasn't really a performance. It was just a harmless joke, right? Nothing serious. After a few moments of hesitation, she glanced at the piano. Her fingers itched to touch the keys. The music, the rhythm, the melodies, they were all there, calling to her. It wasn't about the challenge, not really. It was about the music itself. Still, she wasn't sure if she wanted to reveal this hidden side of her just yet. But what was the harm in playing something simple just to prove him wrong? It was only a joke, after all. No one had to know the truth. She took a deep breath and stood up. Her heart was beating a little faster now, and she could feel her nerves starting to bubble up. She walked toward the piano, her footsteps slow and deliberate, almost as though she were preparing herself for something far more significant than she realized. When she reached the piano, she hesitated for just a moment, running her fingers lightly over the keys as if testing the waters. Then, with a small sigh, she sat down and placed her hands on the keys. She wasn't planning to perform anything extravagant, but as her fingers began to move, something inside her clicked. Her hands flowed across the keys, and before she knew it, the first few notes of a beautiful melody filled the room. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but soon, as if by instinct, the music began to build. The notes were rich, full of emotion, as though each key was telling a story. The music didn't just fill the room, it seemed to take over the entire space. Her body relaxed into the rhythm, her mind letting go of the doubt and fear. She wasn't just playing the piano anymore. She was becoming part of it, part of the music. But no one in the room had expected this. No one had realized what she was capable of. Not even the man who had set this challenge in the first place. The laughter in the room began to die down as people turned toward her. At first, they were confused. Was this a joke? But the more they listened, the more they realized it wasn't. The music was beautiful, haunting, and incredibly skilled. She wasn't playing just any simple tune. She was playing with emotion, with passion, and as the song flowed from her fingers, the room was filled with an unexpected silence, one that was different from the light chatter and laughter that had filled the air moments ago. This was something else entirely. This was music, and it had everyone's full attention. The moment the first few notes of the piano filled the air, something in the room shifted. The laughter and noise from the party faded into the background, replaced by the smooth, flowing melody that seemed to captivate everyone. The people around her, who were just moments ago lost in their own conversations, suddenly found themselves drawn to the piano. One by one, they began to look up, their eyes widening as they realized something was happening, something unexpected, something beautiful. At first, the notes were soft and gentle. It was as if she was testing the piano, like she was trying to feel out the room before diving deeper into the piece. But there was a grace in her movements, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there moments before. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, each note landing perfectly, each chord ringing out with a warmth that seemed to wash over everyone in the room. The piano, which had been an afterthought just a few minutes ago, now became the focal point of the entire gathering. The man who had made the bet, still standing by the table with his cousins, suddenly stopped mid-laugh. He turned to look at her, eyes wide, his smile slowly fading. What had started as a light-hearted joke was now unfolding into something far beyond what he had expected. His jaw dropped slightly, and for the first time that evening, he felt a strange sensation in his stomach, a mix of embarrassment and awe. He had expected a clumsy performance, something that would have ended with a chuckle and a playful, "I told you so." But this was something entirely different. As the music continued to flow, the room fell into an eerie silence. The only sound was the beautiful melody coming from the piano. People slowly began to gather around, drawn by the music, until a small crowd had formed around her. Her face was calm, serene even as she played. Her body relaxed into the rhythm, her fingers never hesitating, each note more confident than the last. The man, still standing across the room, couldn't help but be mesmerized by what was happening. He had always known her as quiet and reserved, someone who kept to herself and never sought attention. She was never the one to jump into conversations or take the lead in group activities. Yet here she was, sitting at the piano, completely in control of the room. The music was no longer just a series of notes. It had become a language, a story that everyone could understand, regardless of their background or experiences. The longer the song went on, the more he realized how wrong he had been. He had made a bet based on the assumption that she was just like everyone else, someone who wouldn't be able to play a piece of music with any real skill. But now, as her fingers danced over the keys, weaving a beautiful, intricate pattern, he saw the truth. He had no idea who she really was. The room, once filled with the chatter of family members catching up, was now silent. Everyone was watching her, captivated by the music. Some guests leaned in closer, straining to hear the delicate notes. Others stood in awe, their faces soft with admiration. No one could quite believe what was happening. This quiet, reserved woman, who many had simply written off as someone who kept to herself, was now commanding the attention of the entire room. Not with words, but with her music. Her fingers moved like they had a life of their own, flowing across the keys as if she had known them intimately for years. The piece she was playing was not simple or easy. It was complex, full of emotion, and required a level of skill that few could master. And yet there she was, playing it effortlessly, as if she had been born to do nothing else but this. For a brief moment, the man wondered if he had somehow misunderstood her. Had he truly never known her at all? The shy, quiet woman who never boasted about her talents, who always sat in the background at family events, had just revealed a side of herself that no one had ever seen before. It was humbling, to say the least. The same people who had dismissed her as just another quiet family member were now in awe of her talent. As the music continued, the man felt a strange mixture of emotions. He was impressed, yes, but also embarrassed. He had thought it would be easy to make a joke out of her, to challenge her in front of everyone, but now he felt small. The piano, once just a piece of furniture in the corner of the room, had become a mirror, reflecting not just the beauty of the music, but the depth of the person who was playing it. The performance seemed to stretch on forever, though it probably lasted no more than a few minutes. The music flowed smoothly, each note building on the last, creating a sense of rising tension and emotion. It was clear that she wasn't just playing the piano. She was expressing herself, pouring her heart into each movement of her hands. There was no hesitation in her touch, no awkwardness in her posture. She was completely absorbed in the music, lost in a world that only she could fully understand. The crowd around the piano grew larger. Whispers of amazement rippled through the group. "Wow, I didn't know she could play like this," one person said, almost to themselves. Another added, "This is incredible. I didn't know she had this in her." The man standing at the back of the crowd could barely move. He was frozen, watching her as if he were seeing her for the first time. How had he missed this? How had he never known? The woman who had been in the background of so many family gatherings, the one who had always kept to herself, had just revealed a side of herself that was nothing short of extraordinary. He was in shock, and a part of him felt deeply ashamed. His joke, his challenge, had been based on nothing but assumption. And now, he was the one who was wrong. As the final notes of the piece echoed through the room, there was a moment of stunned silence. It was as if time had stopped for a brief second, and then, like a dam breaking, the applause came pouring in. It was loud and genuine, full of appreciation and admiration. People clapped, some even standing up in their seats. The man stood there, still in a state of disbelief, as the room erupted in praise. She looked up, startled by the sudden noise, and for the first time since she had started playing, a small, shy smile tugged at her lips. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected anyone to react this way. She had simply played because it was what she loved to do. But now, as she looked around at the faces of her family, faces that had always seen her as quiet and reserved, she saw something else. Admiration, respect. The man slowly walked forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. He was still processing everything that had just happened. He had underestimated her, and now he had to face the consequences of his assumptions. But he couldn't stay silent. He had to say something. "That was incredible," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "I had no idea you could play like that." She shrugged, her cheeks turning pink. "I don't really talk about it," she said quietly. "It's just something I've always done for myself." The man nodded slowly, still trying to absorb the reality of what he had just witnessed. He had thought he was making a joke, that he was going to pull off some clever prank. But now, standing before her, he realized just how wrong he had been. His joke had turned into something far more meaningful. It had turned into a moment of revelation, both for him and for everyone else in the room. The room, still buzzing with excitement, had a new energy. People continued to talk about the performance, some even suggesting that she play another piece. But for now, the magic of the moment had already settled in. She had shared something with them that they had never expected, something that would change the way they saw her from that day forward. And as for him, he had learned a valuable lesson, one that he would never forget. The applause lingered for a moment, filling the room with an energy that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just the music that had captivated everyone, it was the unexpectedness of it all. What had started as a playful joke A harmless challenge had turned into something that no one had anticipated, and now as the echoes of the music faded and the last notes hung in the air, the room was left in a strange, almost reverent silence. She sat at the piano, her hand still resting lightly on the keys, her fingers barely moving. Her heart was racing, though not from the nerves she had felt earlier. This was different. This was the realization that something she had kept hidden for so long had just been revealed. People were looking at her in a way they hadn't before. There was respect in their eyes now, but there was also something else, curiosity. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction. A part of her had hoped maybe for a little praise, but nothing like this. She had been quiet about her talent for years, always playing in the privacy of her room, never drawing attention to herself. Music was her escape, her way of expressing what words often failed to capture. But now her secret was out in the open, and though she wasn't exactly uncomfortable, she couldn't deny the strange feeling of being exposed, of suddenly becoming the center of attention. Across the room, the man who had started it all was still standing there, his eyes wide in disbelief. The smirk that had been on his face earlier had vanished. Now he looked like a man who had just been caught in a lie. He had bet on her inability to play, had made a joke at her expense assuming she would fail, but instead she had done the exact opposite. She had played beautifully, and in doing so she had not only silenced the room, but she had also exposed his own ignorance. As the crowd around the piano began to dissipate, some still talking excitedly about the performance, he made his way over to her. His steps were slow, hesitant, as if he wasn't entirely sure what to say. She had been so calm throughout the whole thing, so composed, while he had been caught off guard. He wanted to say something, to make it right, but the words didn't seem to come. She looked up as he approached, her expression soft but unreadable. There was no hint of smugness in her face. No, I told you so. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance, as though she had expected this all along, even if she hadn't fully realized it until now. That was amazing, he finally said, his voice quieter than usual. I had no idea. She gave a small, almost shy smile. It's just something I do, she replied, her voice soft, as if she were speaking more to herself than to him. He could tell that she wasn't looking for recognition, that she didn't want to be treated any differently now that her secret had been exposed. But the truth was, he couldn't help but feel different about her. The way she had played so effortlessly had completely changed his perception of her. She had always been quiet, always blending into the background. But now he saw her in a completely new light. She was more than just the quiet cousin at family gatherings. She was someone with incredible talent, someone who had been quietly holding on to something special all along. I'm sorry, he said after a moment, his voice sincere. I didn't mean to make it into a joke. I just didn't know. She nodded, her smile still soft. It's okay, she said. I don't really talk about it much. I've always kept it to myself. He nodded too, feeling the weight of his mistake. It wasn't just about the bet anymore, it was about the respect he now felt for her. He realized that he had never truly seen her before. He had assumed, like many others, that she was just another quiet person in the corner of the room. But now he understood. She wasn't hiding. She was just choosing not to reveal herself, choosing not to seek attention for something that was so deeply personal to her. As the evening wore on, the energy in the room slowly shifted. People went back to their conversations, but there was a new respect for her in the air. No one was going to forget her performance anytime soon. Some even asked if she would play again, though she politely declined. She wasn't ready for another round. The first had been enough for now, but for the man who had challenged her, things were different. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The more he replayed the scene in his head, the more he realized how wrong he had been. It wasn't just that he had underestimated her musical talent. It was deeper than that. He had underestimated her as a person. He had assumed she was just another quiet, unremarkable member of the family, someone who wouldn't stand out in a crowd. But now he knew better. He found himself reflecting on his own actions, on the way he had treated her before. He had joked about her, assuming she was just like everyone else. But now, standing there in the aftermath of the performance, he felt a new sense of humility. How many other people had he overlooked, not truly seeing them for who they were? How many times had he dismissed someone just because they didn't fit into his idea of what was important? He glanced around the room, seeing his family in a new light. So many of them had their own talents, their own hidden depths. Maybe it wasn't just about what people showed on the surface. Maybe it was about what they kept to themselves, what they chose not to reveal. And now that he had seen her for who she really was, he couldn't go back to the way things had been before. Later that evening, as the party began to wind down and people started to say their goodbyes, he found himself standing next to her again. This time the conversation was different. There was no joke, no teasing, no challenge. There was only a genuine interest in who she was and what she had done. "You've been playing for a long time, haven't you?" he asked quietly, his voice no longer filled with playful sarcasm, but with a real sense of curiosity. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Since I was little," she said. "My mom used to take me to lessons and I just kept going. But I never really talked about it with anyone." He smiled, the smile of someone who had learned a valuable lesson. "I'm glad you played tonight," he said. "It's not just about the music. It's about showing who you really are." She met his eyes, her smile soft but sincere. "Thanks," she said quietly. "I never wanted anyone to think I was trying to show off. I just play because I love it." The moment hung between them and he could feel the shift in their relationship. It wasn't just about the performance anymore. It was about understanding, about seeing each other in a way they never had before. He no longer saw her as the quiet cousin in the corner. He saw her as someone with a passion, a talent that deserved to be recognized, even if she wasn't actively seeking the spotlight. As the last of the guests filed out the door and the night began to wind down, he couldn't help but think about the change in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the music that had made the evening memorable. It was the realization that no one was exactly who they seemed to be on the surface. And in that moment he knew that he would never take anyone for granted again. After that unforgettable night, the days seemed to pass by in a blur of ordinary events. But she couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had changed. The piano had become more than just an instrument to her. It was no longer a private escape from the world. It had become a bridge between herself and those around her. At first, she hadn't realized just how much of an impact her performance had made on everyone. But as the weeks went by, she began to notice the shift in the way people interacted with her. Her family, who had once seen her as quiet, almost invisible, began to speak to her with a newfound respect. They asked her more questions, invited her into conversations, and even encouraged her to share more of herself. She had always been the type to keep to herself, hiding in the background while others took the spotlight. It wasn't that she was shy, but more that she preferred not to make waves. Music, however, had always been her true voice, the one way she could express what words failed to convey. But before that night, she had kept her gift hidden, unsure of how to share it without drawing too much attention to herself. Now things were different. The applause from the night of the performance had faded, but the respect that came with it remained. People didn't look at her the same way anymore. They saw her differently, as someone who had something valuable to offer, not just in music but in conversation, in life. They looked at her as if she mattered in a way they hadn't before. One afternoon, as she sat in the living room, she overheard a conversation between two of her cousins. They were talking about the performance, about how impressive it was that she had been able to play so beautifully without any prior warning. They were still in awe of her. She could hear the admiration in their voices, the way they spoke of her as if she were someone extraordinary. It made her smile, but it also made her feel a little uncomfortable. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Her cousin, who had been the most vocal about her supposed lack of musical talent, had even mentioned that night more than once. He hadn't just apologized for doubting her. He had started treating her differently. There was a quiet respect in the way he spoke to her now, a kind of acknowledgement that he had misjudged her. It felt strange to her, but it also felt good. She had always been the one in the background, the one who didn't need to prove herself. But now things were shifting and she was unsure how to navigate this new reality. She didn't want to be the center of attention, but it was hard to ignore the way people had started to treat her. One day, a few weeks after the performance, her cousin approached her again. He had always been the life of the party, the one who made jokes and kept the atmosphere light, but now his approach was different. He wasn't cracking jokes or making light of the situation. Instead, he was serious, almost hesitant. "Hey," he said, standing by the door as she played some soft notes on the piano. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She stopped playing, her fingers lingering on the keys. "Of course," she said, looking up at him. He shuffled his feet, not quite meeting her eyes at first. I just wanted to say, well, I've been thinking about that night. You know when you played? She nodded, her heart giving a small flutter. She had no idea where this conversation was headed, but she could already tell it wasn't going to be a typical chat. I was wrong, he continued, his voice quieter than usual. I mean, I can't even describe how much I underestimated you. I didn't think you had it in you, honestly. But now I see it differently. I'm sorry for making that joke, for doubting you. She smiled, trying to put him at ease. It's okay, she said, her voice calm. You didn't know, but he wasn't finished. No, I think I needed to see it. I needed to see you show us all what you could do. It's just, I didn't realize you were hiding something like that. She felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the apology that touched her. It was the fact that he wasn't just apologizing, he was recognizing her, truly seeing her for the first time. It felt good, but it also felt a little overwhelming. I wasn't hiding it, she said softly. I just never felt the need to show it. Music is personal for me. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that now, he said. It's amazing. You should never feel like you can't share it with the world. She shrugged, unsure of how to respond. She had never thought of herself as someone who needed to share her talents. It had always been something for her alone, a secret she kept close to her heart. But now, as her cousin stood there, genuinely wanting to understand, she felt a flicker of something inside her, a desire to share, to be seen for who she really was. I'll think about it, she said, her voice quiet but firm. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the piano filling the air around them. It was a comfortable silence, one that spoke volumes without the need for words. Thanks, he said finally, his voice sincere. I'll never underestimate you again. With that, he turned and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She returned to the piano, her fingers lightly tracing the keys. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she knew one thing for certain. Something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't afraid to be seen. She wasn't afraid to share her music, her passion, her true self. Later that week, her cousin invited her to dinner with the rest of the family. It was a casual gathering, nothing special. But this time, when she walked into the room, she noticed the difference. There was no pressure, no teasing, no questioning. There was just a quiet acceptance, a recognition of who she was, of what she could do. The evening passed in a relaxed haze, filled with laughter and casual conversations. But as the night wore on, her cousin once again approached her, this time with a suggestion. You should play, he said, his tone light but encouraging. Just a little something for us. We all want to hear you again. She hesitated, looking around at the familiar faces, but something inside her urged her to say yes. It wasn't about impressing anyone anymore. It wasn't about proving anything. It was just about sharing a part of herself, the part that had always been there. Waiting to be seen. I'll play, she said, her voice calm but confident. Everyone gathered around the piano, waiting expectantly, and for the first time she didn't feel the weight of their expectations. She just felt a sense of peace. As her fingers began to play, she closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. The room grew quiet as the familiar notes filled the air, and for that moment, it was as if time stood still. When the music came to an end, the room erupted in quiet applause. It wasn't loud, but it was warm, genuine. She looked up and saw the smiles on the faces around her. She saw the pride in her cousin's eyes, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't just the quiet one in the corner anymore. She was someone with something to offer, someone whose presence mattered. That night, she didn't need to say anything. The music had spoken for her. And in that moment, she knew that she had finally found her place, not just in the family, but in the world. The days following the piano performance seemed to blur together, each one quietly moving forward as life tended to do. The family gatherings returned to their usual rhythm, but there was a subtle shift in the way people interacted with each other. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. And for her, the woman who had once kept herself in the background, it was a change that she hadn't expected. She found herself receiving more attention than she was used to. People, some of them distant relatives she barely knew, would approach her and ask her about the music. They asked about her piano playing, about how long she had been playing, and if she would ever perform again. But she didn't have an answer for them. Performing wasn't something she did for others. It was something that she did for herself, a way of expressing what she couldn't say with words. Despite this, she noticed something different in her own reactions. There was a growing sense of pride when people spoke to her about the performance. She could feel the admiration in their voices, the way they looked at her with new respect. But it wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about something deeper, something more personal. She began to realize how long she had hidden that part of herself, how often she had kept her talents to herself because she didn't want to stand out. Her quiet nature had always kept her in the shadows, and for a long time she was comfortable there. But the applause, the conversations, the respect, it was all forcing her to see that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about herself. Maybe it was okay to be seen. Maybe it was okay to share what she loved with others. Her family, too, seemed to change, though it was subtle. The people who had once taken her for granted now began to see her in a new light. Her cousins, who used to ignore her or treat her like the quiet one, now looked at her with more interest. They would make an effort to include her in conversations, to ask her opinions, to talk about things that mattered to her. And that shift, though small, was a big deal to her. It was a sign that something had changed, not just in the way they saw her, but in the way they saw the world around them. As for the man who had started the whole thing with his offhand challenge, things were different with him too. The awkwardness between them had melted away in the days after the performance. There had been no need for him to apologize again. He had already done that, and his sincerity had been clear. But he did something else that made all the difference. He treated her differently. He didn't talk to her like the quiet person in the room anymore. He talked to her like she was someone worth listening to. They began to have conversations, real ones, not about music, not about bets or challenges, but about life, about dreams, about what they wanted out of the future, about the things that made them both nervous or excited. It was a new kind of friendship, one that hadn't existed before, and it felt comfortable, natural. He had always thought of her as distant, but now he realized she was just waiting for someone to see her, really see her. And when he did, he was amazed at what he found. He never missed an opportunity to encourage her. Sometimes, in the middle of a casual conversation, he would mention how incredible he thought her piano playing was. Sometimes he would ask her to play again, though she always declined. She didn't want to make a performance out of something that had been so personal. But he kept asking, and every time he did, she felt a little more comfortable in her own skin. He wasn't just asking because of a joke anymore. He was asking because he genuinely appreciated her talent. In time, something began to shift inside her. She found herself sitting at the piano more often, not out of obligation, but out of a newfound desire to play. She began to experiment with new pieces, to challenge herself in ways she hadn't before. And while she still played quietly in the privacy of her home, she started to feel a sense of peace when she played. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about rediscovering a part of herself she had almost forgotten existed. One day, a few months after the party, the family gathered again. This time there was no challenge, no joke, no bet. Just the familiar faces, the casual conversations, and the warm laughter that filled the air. But as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. The man who had once jokingly asked her to play the piano stood up and made his way over to her. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Would you play something for us?" She glanced up at him, surprised. There was no teasing in his voice, no playful challenge. He wasn't expecting her to fail. He wasn't waiting for her to stumble. He was simply asking because he knew she had something special to share. For a moment, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to play in front of everyone again, but something about the way he asked, so simply, so sincerely, made her rethink. Maybe this time it wouldn't feel like a performance. Maybe this time it would feel like a gift. "I'll play something," she said finally, standing up and walking toward the piano. The room grew quieter, though not in the same way it had the first time. This time it was less about awe and more about anticipation. The family had grown to expect something beautiful, but there was no pressure. There was no expectation that she had to impress anyone. She sat down at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys gently. For a moment the room was still, and then, as her fingers began to play, the familiar warmth of the music spread through the room. It wasn't the same piece she had played before, but it didn't matter. The music, whatever it was just as powerful. As she played, she noticed something different. She wasn't just playing for herself this time. She was playing for them, for the family who had come to understand her in a new way. She was playing because they wanted to hear it, and because she wanted to share that part of herself. It wasn't about standing out anymore. It was about connecting. It was about sharing something personal, something that had always been a part of her. When the last notes faded, the room was quiet for a moment. And then, just like the first time, the applause came, not loud but warm, genuine. She looked up and met the eyes of the man who had asked her to play, and for the first time there was no awkwardness between them. There was only understanding, only respect. "You were amazing," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that said everything without needing words. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. But she didn't need the applause, and she didn't need the compliments. What mattered now was that she had played, not because she had been asked, but because she wanted to. And in that moment, she realized that it was okay to share her gifts with the world. It wasn't about showing off. It was about connecting with others, about expressing the things she couldn't say. As the night continued and the guests began to say their goodbyes, she felt a quiet satisfaction in her heart. She had come a long way since that first unexpected performance. She had stepped out of the shadows not to seek attention, but to be true to herself. And that, more than anything, was the most important thing she had learned. The man who had once made a joke, who had once underestimated her, now stood by her side. Not as someone who had made a bet, but as someone who had witnessed her growth. And together they both knew that this was just the beginning of something new.